Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Unstoppable Dad Project. Thanks once again for joining me on another episode this week. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day and supporting this podcast. Before I get into today's episode, please make sure that you're subscribed on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. We are on all the major podcast platforms. You'll also be able to find video versions of the podcast on our YouTube channel. So jump on over, give us a subscribe on YouTube, and follow us on the socials at The Unstoppable Dad on Instagram and The Unstoppable Dad Project on Facebook. And as always, if you find some value out of what it is that I'm doing here on today's episode, make sure you share it around with anybody who you think might also find some value from it. So this week's episode is called Deflecting Blame and Looking for Shortcuts. And both of those things are interconnected. And what I mean by that is, let's use an example of somebody who has a recurring injury when it comes to training, right? And this is something that I come up against all the time, but this can translate into a whole bunch of other areas of our life. Now, before I get into it, let me preface this by saying, I think everybody does this to some degree. Some people do it more than others. Some people do it in one area of their life. Other people do it in multiple areas of their life. But I think it's just a common flaw as human beings, and it all really, I think, boils down to us wanting to take the path of least resistance, us looking for the easy way out. Because at the end of the day, if there's something that we can achieve the same result for doing less work, I think most of us will choose to take that route. But the thing is, most of the time, the result that you are going to get by taking the path of least resistance may not necessarily give you as good of a result or the actual result that you're looking for. It might give you a result, but not the actual result that you're looking for. And I use this in the context of injury, but as I said, I believe it translates across a whole spectrum of different areas of life. And say, for example, somebody gets hurt. And I think as we get older, we tend to have these things pop up, and it's like it just happens randomly, right? Like there's not an incident or an event that has actually caused us to get hurt. It might just be that we wake up the next morning and our back's not feeling great, or our knee's not feeling great, or whatever. Just pick something, pick one of the nagging injuries if you're listening to this that you've had. And potentially it's to the point where it's limiting us severely in everyday life or in things that we're going to do. So what do? We kind of start to go through a process of looking at what may have caused this. What are the reasons why this has happened? Has it been training? Has it been work? Is it the fact that I sit at a computer all day? What is it? What is the reason that this has happened? Why am I feeling like shit, and what has caused it? And then we go through this process of trying to identify what has caused it. And then from there, most people will do one of two things. They'll either leave it in the hope that it's going to get better, or they'll start to do something to address it. But as we go through this process of trying to find out what's wrong or who's responsible for it, what I've noticed with a great number of people is they'll always dial down to something that they believe has caused it. So it's like, I've got a sore neck, I sit at a computer all day, that's what's caused me to have this like really great pain in my neck at the moment. So I'll go and do so, I'll go and get some treatment, I'll go and see a physio, I'll go see chiro, I'll go see a massage therapist, whatever the case might be, to try and address it. But it's work. Work is the problem. But what they're not looking at is they're not looking at the whole picture. And they're not looking at other lifestyle factors. They're not looking at, maybe they are not getting adequate sleep. So maybe they're only getting 5 hours of sleep a night. So their body's not able to get into a recovered state. Maybe it's that they drink a lot. Maybe it's that they're having a glass of wine or two every single night, and then they're drinking more than they maybe should on the weekend. So their body's constantly in this natural state of being inflamed and not actually having the time to heal any underlying concerns until they get to the point where it's completely exacerbated and it's causing them I'm trying to think of a word, an inordinate amount of pain where it's causing a great deal of pain, so they're not actually addressing it. Maybe it's that their nutrition is subpar. Like, there are all these other lifestyle factors that they're not looking at, but they've tied it to work. So then what do? The easy thing is maybe they start to, they get a sit-stand desk. They do all this stuff where they're like, or they just go, there's nothing I can do about it. I'm just going to keep going to the chiro or the physio. I'm just going to keep getting this treatment in, and I'm just going to try and manage it rather than correct it. And the thing is, taking that approach, you're looking for a shortcut in order to get a result to make yourself feel better. So you're outsourcing your health to somebody else. And rather than looking at the whole picture and looking at these other things that are going on, we're deflecting the blame to something that we feel is an easy thing to fix. Because the other things on the periphery are a hard thing to actually invest the time into fixing. It is something like maybe not drinking as much. Now, I've done a few episodes on my thoughts on alcohol and one of the reasons why I really don't drink at all anymore. But it may be something that if you're in a lot of pain, a lot of physical pain, you may have to dial back the alcohol consumption in order to come out the other side of it. But that's a very hard thing to do for a lot of people because there's potentially a low level of addiction there. There is social pressures in order to give that up. There are a lot of things that a lot of steps in place and a lot of willpower and a lot of hard work that needs to go to do that. It's the same as doing other contributing lifestyle factors, making sure you're getting enough sleep. While it may seem like a very simple thing to say, go to bed earlier, that can be a really hard thing for a lot of people because, again, there's the potential where there's this low level of addiction around scrolling your phone for too long, watching that extra series of Netflix, like that extra episode of Netflix. Like, there's all these other mechanics where that particular action and that particular habit that you need to look to change, there's a lot of work that looks to go into it. So what do we do when something adverse happens? When something goes wrong, I think as human beings, like we want something to feel responsible. And for a lot of us, we don't want us to be responsible for it. We want an external factor to be responsible for it. For some people, if it's something, maybe you've started an exercise regime and then you've woke up with this pain that may actually be completely unrelated to the exercise regime, but you blame that because it's easy just to go, you know what? I'm going to stop training because this is what's caused this. Whereas we're not looking at the whole picture, and maybe we've got all these other factors going on in the background that are going to require more work for us to fix, but it's easier to deflect the blame over here and go, this is what's caused it, and it's going to be an easy thing for me just to cut that out and not do it, and I need that to be responsible because this can't be my fault. And yes, there's sometimes where there are going to be circumstances outside of your control that are going to contribute to it. And there's no point in beating yourself up about that. But more often than not, what I'm noticing in my life and in the lives of other people that I've come across and had conversations with, we've got more inside our circle of control than what we've actually got outside of it. And that goes when we go through this process where we're in pain or something's wrong and we deflect the blame to it, and then we start looking for the shortcuts, we start looking for that easy way out, we are tending to blame something that is outside of our control and focusing on that and not focusing on the potential factors that may have contributed to that negative circumstance that we can change inside of our control. Because in order to change those things, it requires a lot of work in order to do that. And it is hard to change those things. And it's going to require a lot of willpower, and you're going to go through times of self-doubt where you're going to wonder whether you're doing the right thing. But the result that I think you will get when you go through that work to work on yourself and work on those circumstances is going to be a far greater result than the one where we're outsourcing our well-being or we're outsourcing the result to somebody else. And as I said at the top of the podcast, I think we all do this to some degree in different areas of our life. It's just a sliding scale on how much we do it and how many areas we let it come into our lives. And to digress for a little bit, I've done a lot of episodes on self-confidence and the way we feel about ourselves. And I think for some of us, if we are in this phase of life where we tend to deflect a lot of blame for things that go wrong to outside circumstances and to other people, it can feed into a lack of self-confidence because we feel we have no control over the things that are going wrong or the quote-unquote bad things that are happening. Whereas when we kind of take that step into taking the steps to rectify the situation, and we understand that there's a big amount of things that we can control and we can work towards improving, it can actually help feed that confidence because it's like, hey, I know I'm in a shitty situation, but I can improve this. There are a lot of actionable steps that I can take to actually get myself out of the other side of it rather than relying on somebody else to do it for me. And by doing that, and we are looking to take control of the things that we can control, it can become a really empowering thing. So from the point of view of what can we do if we identify that we're doing this a lot, I think we need to step back and look at the whole picture. If we're looking at it from, say, an injury point of view, like look at it holistically from top to bottom. What are the daily habits that you undertake? You know, if it's an injury thing, you know, look at alcohol consumption, look at sleep, look at nutrition, making sure you're adequately fueled for your activity level. All these things are going to matter, not just the training that you've done and not just, say, your work circumstances or your natural posture during the day. Like those things, while they can be a contributing factor and while those things may be outside of your control, there are a whole bunch of things inside of your control that if you look to make positive improvements on them, can help with coming back from that injury, and not only just coming back from it in the short term, but improving your recovery rate in the long term and lessening the chances of it reoccurring. Now, in saying all this, there can be more efficient and less efficient ways of doing things. Okay, so looking for an easier route can sometimes be a good thing for you. But the fact is, it doesn't matter whether it's a more efficient or less efficient route. The bottom line and what I'm trying to get across in this podcast is a lot of this is going to require work on you in order to improve it. And while there are going to be people like myself who may be able to, if it's an injury point of view, who may be able to actually give you a more efficient roadmap, there within that roadmap, it is still going to require you to take the steps and take the action and do the work in order to improve it, rather than just deflecting it into somebody else or into an external circumstance that you can't control, which then gives you the easy option out of it to go, that is something I can't control, that is something I can't change, therefore I'm just going to leave it as is, or I'm going to outsource it to somebody else who is going to take care of it for me. Now, don't get me wrong, in the early stages of rehab, going and seeing somebody like a physio or a chiro or something like that is very, very, very important to get a diagnosis. But most good physios and chiros will not require you to come back every week for the next 27 weeks in order to get you sorted. Like, if they're trying to make you dependent on them, it is a little bit of a red flag. Now, that's not the same in every instance, but there should be a plan to try and progress you out of pain and get you a little bit more self-sufficient. A little bit of a digression, but it all links in to it, because again, linking back to that, even when you go and see them in the short term, in the long term, it's going to fall back on you to do the work and to make sure that you are taking the steps, not just in the short term, but in the long term, to make sure that you don't find yourself back in this same level of pain again. So, as we move through life, if you find that there are areas of your life where you are deflecting blame and maybe you feel a little bit down about not being able to change your circumstances in that particular area of life, and again, everything requires context, right? It is not always, nothing is ever black and white and nothing is ever clear cut. As I said a couple of weeks ago on my podcast, life exists on a spectrum. So there are going to be all matters of area of grey, and if something negative happens to you, there are going to be parts of that that are absolutely outside of your control. And there is no point in dwelling on that, because dwelling on the things that are outside of your control are going to not serve you at all. But just focusing on the things that are outside of your control and not focusing on the things within that circumstance that are within your control is also not going to serve you as well. So if something negative happens, if you get injured or anything like that, look at the whole picture. Even sit down and write yourself a list. Write down on one side things that are outside of my control, things that are inside my control. What I consume, the amount of sleep I get, that's inside my control. For some of us, other than maybe new parents, there's elements of that are outside of your control. But write down that list and then start to get to work on the things that you can control. Because by doing that, it's going to make a positive impact in improving that situation, and it's going to start to move things in the right direction. And then all of a sudden, I would hazard a guess that the things that are outside of your control are going to start to go into the background, and you're going to care less and less about what happens with them, because you're getting to work on the things that you can control and things are starting to improve. And one of the things to feed our confidence and feed our motivation for any action is to actually start to see an improvement. Once we see an improvement and we start to see some form of results, it becomes easier to keep fulfilling that work and fulfilling that promise to ourselves. But it is hard not to deflect blame and not to try and look for the shortcut. I think there's an element of human nature where we want to do that, because we want to take the easy way out if we can. We don't want to have to put in the work, but that can be a surefire result to not actually get anywhere. And while it may be able to solve things in the short term, in the long term, from what I've seen and what I've experienced in my life, it can actually make things worse. So let me know if you've actually identified that in your life, right? Like, drop me a message, drop a comment on the in the comment section on YouTube or on the Facebook page, and let me know, like, what have you experienced in your life and how have you corrected it? Let me know the certain steps that you've taken within yourself to identify, hey, I'm actually deflecting this and there's a lot here within my power that I can change. What are those steps you've used to identify that? Or has there been an event that has actually shown to you, hey, I need to take control of my own shit here and actually get moving forward? So let me know what you think. Take care. Appreciate you listening every single week. I'll see you next week. Goodbye.